Well, thanks, Cindy, for inviting me. I have a paper on my computer, but I really don't like to put my computer in front of me, so I will talk off the top of my head, following to some extent the paper that I have. So the title of my paper is Emerging Genres 1707 to 2007, which I chose just for its numerical niceness. I guess what I'm interested in is what are genres? So let's say we have a pretty good idea of what sort of large-scale genres might be that we find in almost every written culture and even some oral cultures. And I would say here we might include only things like prose, poetry, and some kind of performative text. Even in linguistic work with primarily oral cultures, we tend to be able to divide text very roughly into these categories, but that's all, right? And that's not what we usually mean by genre, though of course it is to a large extent how we organize our teaching. What we tend to mean by genre when we use it is something much more precise than that, right? Something that refers to things that we know are historically constructed and that in fact we see being historically constructed to a large extent in the 18th century, and that might include something like the novel, right? Or prose fiction, or the short story, or a play, or a history play, or a tragedy. We know that all of these forms are historically constructed and contingent and related to a particular culture, and they're not necessary. We know cultures that don't have them or that have other forms. And one of the reasons that we turn to the 18th century, and that I in particular am interested in the 18th century, especially in Defoe, but also in people like Swift, who I think we could do well to pay attention to more these days, is that we see something like genres coming into being. And I think it's vital to understand that in what Gail has really brightly pointed out is a new historicist sense, that it is not an evolution. It is not something aiming towards something else. It is not Defoe trying to find the novel and Richardson trying to find the novel and Sterne trying to find the novel, right? It is a proliferation of forms that happen to some extent willy-nilly. And it's remarkable. And the more we can look at those texts and not see, boy, Defoe was just trying to be Jane Austen, and he almost got there. That's not what's happening, right? And in fact, when we look at the text that Defoe has, the multiplicity of texts that we see in Defoe in particular, the last thing Defoe was concerned about was genre, right? In the sense that we mean it. He was just writing. He would write anything, right? And of course, he knew the difference between poetry and prose to some extent, right? We know that there are poems he wrote and he deliberately delineated them, whatever. He had some idea of fictional versus non-fictional narrative, right? But I mean, even that is going pretty crazy. And I mean, even some idea of, reflection as opposed to sort of narrative. But then there again, right? I mean, it's all changing all the time. And, I wonder, one of the things I hope that this sort of New Historicist project is trying to do in a very broad sense is to raise in us the question of whether we need the genres to be as formulaic as they have become. Could we have some kind of creativity that is less obedient to what Derrida might call the law of genre, right? Genres are not to be mixed. Things must be in order. And when we sort of move to the especially modern and contemporary moment, we have another sense of genre, right, that we talk about sort of genre art, genre fiction, right? Stuff that is so baked into its form that we might even say it looks to have been produced by a machine, right? And those are the genres that especially if we aren't engaged with them, we wonder how in the world can people be engaged with them, right? How can people read romance fiction when it's just a mechanical text in which different names have been plugged in and they all do the same exact thing, right? It's automatic, it's machine-like. There is no room for creativity, for breaking the form. And of course, when we're studying literature and art in their high forms, what we love to do is find things that do break the form, right? That break the form, and this also is part of Derrida's point, that break the form while obeying the form, right? That break the form out of some, I use this term cautiously, some human need to, some human drive to inspire the form with some kind of creativity that is larger than the mechanical demands of the form, right? And that is certainly what I think Defoe can teach us, right, in terms of what is possible outside of genre, and what is possible if we, to some extent, allowed genre to be seen in an even more historical context than we do. And so I will close by talking about, well, what does that mean for the electronic world, and why, I mean, certainly I get this from looking at ECCO, I get this from looking at the facsimile pages, which I think are absolutely wonderful and vital, and both in the 18th century and in the early modern period that I like to look at. They also, I believe, are terribly vital for understanding what these texts looked like, as opposed to the sort of transcriptions that we would get in books that we read Shakespeare and read Defoe in, right? And so let's say two things. I believe that sort of following Swift, we are experiencing a real mania for genres and for categorization, and that in contrast to Defoe's time, when genres were emerging all over the place, but people were not largely reflecting on them in this proactive way. What genre is going to come next, right? What is it going to look like? Defoe, he might retroactively sort of reflect on what was Robinson Crusoe, right? I mean, it was a spiritual allegory, it was a autobiography, but he didn't write these advertisements like, I've got the next great genre, it's called historical narrative, and it's coming next week, right? And I do think we see that on the computer. I think we see, especially in rhetoric around things like Web 2.0, and even to some extent in things like Lev Manovich's Language of New Media and other work on new media, the genre is coming. It's going to save us. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be really great. It's going to be different. There's something different coming. Maybe there is something different coming. But I think it would be a lot more interesting to sort of be Defoe-like, produce, and not worry so much about what it's going to look like. In fact, I think worrying so much about what it's going to look like ends up constraining us more than we might think. And I'll make that point in two ways about computers. First of all, with regard to Web 2.0, I think especially, of course, Web 2.0 comes out of Tim Berners-Lee's and some other World Wide Web Consortium people's view about the semantic web. And the idea of that was, in order to make text machine readable, we were going to wrap all kinds of semantic data around it. And the idea is that makes things more searchable. I think that is philosophically tendentious and empirically probably wrong. That in fact, keyword searching, as Google shows us with a lot of both philosophical and practical rigor, is the only way to search text, right? And that you can see a lot of reasons why this would be, but one of the most obvious ones is language. What language do you write the metadata in, right? If you write it in English, well, you have just limited the searching to English-only speakers, whereas the English people who don't speak English still might be able to keyword search inside the text. It's harder if they're searching the metadata. Now, of course, the metadata can be extra or whatever, but I think that at least it's philosophically arguable that what you are doing when you wrap stuff like that is making these less available rather than more available. And I could give some examples of that. But in that respect, I think that ECCO is really interesting in that it doesn't provide a lot of tagging. And I'm not arguing that it couldn't have a few more keywords and that there couldn't be community-based keywords and so forth. But to give an example that you said, right, linking the text. Well, who's going to decide what links are appropriate and what links are not appropriate? And where is the limit, right? I mean, we could arguably say that almost every text in ECCO is, arguably linkable to every other text. That's not going to help anyone, right? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't explore that to some extent, but I'm saying the desire to do that, to me, in some way, reflects a kind of mania for categorization that Swift was pretty worried about, right? That he thought was sort of indicative of a kind of bent of mind that we might have. And that we might want to try and resist a little bit. And I'll give one other example, which is Wikipedia, right? I think Wikipedia is an example of a kind of emerging genre that is pretty hard to understand and was pretty challenging to a lot of people as it came into being. And because of its name and because of its function, people said, well, that's an encyclopedia. It's like the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it fails, right? It isn't as good an encyclopedia because I found some problems in it, right? Well, first of all, I think those problems are largely overstated. And that cleaned up for this reason, this doesn't fit over here, and That's great. I mean, it's fine that they're trying to make it more authoritative, but it seems to me their time and energy is being now taken up with this sort of project to make everything fit. And there's less time being spent just building the pages, which is in itself, I think, is a more creative, interesting project that, where again, tagging, who cares, right? I mean, you search Wikipedia by keywords, by full text, you find what you want. There's a lot of linking, whatever, but it's that creativity that I think, the web at certain points, in a case like Wikipedia, shares with Defoe, and I hope we can, keep urging that part of it on, and maybe a little bit less mania for putting things into boxes. Thank you.